The night was unusually quiet as Sergeant Jonathan Turner stood watch over the vast, dark expanse of space. The stars above twinkled softly, their distant light offering a sense of peace, far removed from the chaos of the battlefield. Jonathan, however, was far from relaxed. As a guard of the Human Federation, his duty was to protect the people from any threats that lurked in the vast unknown. But this night, something felt off. There was an unease in the air, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. For years, Jonathan had heard the stories, the whispers of a powerful alien queen who ruled over an empire spanning galaxies. Some said she was a cruel tyrant. Others claimed she was a wise and just ruler. No one knew for sure, for no human had ever set foot in her domain. The very idea of the alien queen was a myth, a tale told to keep soldiers on edge. But now, as Jonathan stared into the deep, endless void, the story seemed to shift from myth to reality. He had received a message earlier in the day, an encrypted transmission, unlike anything he had seen before. The source was unknown, the message cryptic, but the contents were clear. The alien queen summons you. Proceed to the coordinates. Your destiny awaits. Jonathan's mind raced. The alien queen. Why would she summon him? He was just a guard, a soldier who had seen his fair share of battles, but nothing like this. He tried to shake the thoughts from his head, telling himself it was just a prank, but the tone of the message, the urgency in the words, told him otherwise. With a deep breath, Jonathan activated the spacecraft's thrusters. The sleek vessel glided silently through space, its engine humming softly as it headed towards the coordinates in the message. As he sat at the controls, the weight of the unknown pressed down on him. What could this queen want with him? Was he about to face some kind of test? Or worse, was this a trap? His grip tightened on the steering console as the stars passed by, at an increasing speed, the distance between him and the alien queen closing with every passing second. The journey to the queen's palace took longer than expected. The coordinates led him to an uncharted sector of space, an area where no human had dared venture. As the ship neared the coordinates, the vastness of the alien world before him was overwhelming. The planet was massive. Its surface was a mix of crystal-clear oceans and towering mountain ranges, but there was no sign of civilization, no cities or settlements. Just a solitary palace perched on a cliff that seemed to pierce the sky itself. Jonathan's heart raced as he approached the palace. It was unlike anything he had ever seen before. The structure was enormous, made of a strange, shimmering material that reflected the light of distant stars. Tall spires rose from the palace, reaching upwards like fingers stretching to the heavens. The walls were adorned with intricate designs, unknown symbols that seemed to glow with an eerie light. It looked ancient, but at the same time incredibly advanced, an architectural wonder that defied understanding. The ship gently descended, landing with a soft thud on the palace grounds. Jonathan couldn't help but feel a chill run down his spine. This was no ordinary place. There was a palpable power in the air, an energy that seemed to hum in the very atmosphere. As the ramp descended, Jonathan hesitated for a moment. Was he truly prepared for whatever awaited him inside? The feeling of dread was hard to shake, but duty called, and he had no choice but to face whatever lay ahead. Stepping off the ship, he was greeted by a strange silence. The palace seemed empty at first, but Jonathan could feel eyes on him, hidden, watching. He moved cautiously, each step echoing in the vast, empty courtyard. The stone beneath his boots was smooth, almost as if it had been crafted with care and precision. The air was thick with mystery, and every movement felt like it could trigger something monumental. As Jonathan made his way through the palace grounds, the silence grew even more intense. It wasn't until he reached the grand entrance of the palace that he heard it, the sound of footsteps. They were soft yet deliberate, echoing off the walls as if someone were walking towards him. Jonathan's breath caught in his throat. Was it her? The alien queen? He had heard that her presence could strike fear into the hearts of even the bravest warriors, but nothing could have prepared him for what he was about to witness. The massive, Doors of the palace slowly creaked open, revealing a throne room bathed in golden light. There, seated upon a towering throne, was the alien queen herself. She was unlike anything Jonathan had ever imagined. Tall and regal, her features were sharp and elegant, her eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. She wore ornate armor, crafted from materials he could not recognize, and a crown that shimmered like starlight. Her presence filled the room, and Jonathan could feel the weight of her gaze on him. Every step he took seemed insignificant in comparison to her overwhelming presence. "Welcome, human," the queen's voice echoed through the room, deep and powerful, yet strangely calming. "You have come as I have summoned. You are not here by chance." Jonathan stood frozen, unsure of what to say. He had expected power, but the reality of it was far greater than he could have imagined. The queen leaned forward, her eyes never leaving his. "You have been chosen, Jonathan Turner. Chosen for a task that will change the fate of your kind. The question is, are you ready?" The room fell silent once again, the only sound being the beat of Jonathan's own heart. His mind was racing. What had he gotten himself into? The unknown stretched out before him, full of promise, mystery, and danger. But one thing was clear. This was just the beginning. Jonathan stood frozen, his heart pounding in his chest as the alien queen's gaze fixed upon him. The throne room, bathed in a soft golden glow, seemed to grow colder under her watchful eyes. He had heard the stories, the myths about her power, but standing before her in the heart of her domain was a completely different experience. She wasn't just a ruler, she was an overwhelming presence, a force that seemed to command not only the room but the very air he breathed. Her voice, deep and resonant, broke the silence that had stretched between them. "You are here because I have chosen you, Jonathan Turner. Not for any reason of your own, but because of what you represent. A spark of potential that could shift the balance of power in this universe." Jonathan tried to steady his breath, his mind racing. He had never been in a situation like this before. As a soldier, he was used to following orders, but this felt different. The queen's words were not just commands. They carried an undertone of something deeper, something that felt both exciting and terrifying. She continued, her eyes never leaving his. "You, a human, are now part of something much larger than yourself. You are not just an ordinary soldier. You are a key to the survival of this galaxy. The forces you will face are unlike anything you have encountered before, and the training I will put you through will prepare you for what is to come." Jonathan swallowed hard, trying to digest what she had said. The queen had chosen him, but why? Why was he, just a guard, being thrust into this unimaginable situation? What did she mean by the forces he would face? And why did she think he, of all people, could stand against them? The queen rose from her throne with an effortless grace that only amplified her presence. Her armor shimmered under the light, a strange blend of futuristic technology and ancient, mysterious designs. It was as if her armor was not just for protection, but a symbol of her power, her lineage, her very essence. She was not just a leader. She was a living embodiment of the might she commanded. "You will undergo a training unlike anything you have experienced," the queen said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "This training will test not only your physical abilities, but your mind and spirit. If you succeed, you will be ready to face what is coming. If you fail..." She let the sentence hang in the air, the implication clear. Failure was not an option. Jonathan nodded, though his stomach churned. What kind of training could she be talking about? The thought of facing whatever enemies the queen was preparing him for made him uneasy. But he was a soldier, and soldiers followed orders, even if those orders were terrifying. Without a word, the queen gestured to a set of doors on the far side of the throne room. 2 alien guards stood silently by the entrance, their eyes scanning Jonathan as he walked past them. The doors opened silently, and Jonathan stepped into the next chamber, a massive hall filled with an array of strange devices and tools. This was no ordinary training ground. This was a place where warriors were forged, where minds and bodies were pushed beyond their limits. "Here," the Queen's voice echoed as she stepped beside him. "You will begin. You will face challenges that will force you to think, adapt, and survive. Your first test is not one of strength but of survival." Jonathan's eyes widened as he looked around. In one corner of the room, strange machines hummed with energy, while in another, holographic screens flickered with images of distant worlds. But it was the center of the room that caught his attention. There, suspended in the air, was a large glowing sphere, its energy pulsing and shifting as though alive. "This," the Queen said, her voice lowering, "is your first challenge. You must retrieve the energy core from within the sphere. But be warned, it is not as simple as it appears. The core is protected by a series of deadly defenses. If you are not careful, it will destroy you." Jonathan's eyes narrowed as he assessed the sphere. The task sounded straightforward, but the Queen's words made it clear that it was anything but. He had been in dangerous situations before, but this was something entirely different. This wasn't just about fighting, it was about surviving. The Queen stepped back, her eyes watching him closely. "You have 1 hour to retrieve the core. You may use any tools or strategies you think will work, but remember, this is just the beginning. You will need more than just brute strength to succeed here." Jonathan took a deep breath and stepped forward, his mind racing. He had trained for battles, for war, but this was something else. He couldn't rely on his usual tactics. The Queen had mentioned survival adaptation. He would need to think differently, use his wits, not just his muscle. As he approached the glowing sphere, the air around it seemed to crackle with energy. A sense of foreboding filled the room, and Jonathan instinctively reached for the weapons, strapped to his belt, though he knew they would do him little good here. This was not a fight. It was a test of intelligence and skill. He extended his hand toward the sphere, and as his fingers brushed its surface, a shock wave of energy coursed through him. His body went rigid, and he stumbled backward, barely catching himself. The room seemed to darken for a moment, and the Queen's voice rang in his ears, cool and commanding. "Do not rely on your strength alone. Adapt." Jonathan's eyes narrowed as he regained his balance. He realized then that the Queen was right. This wasn't about fighting or brute force. It was about thinking strategically, understanding the environment and adapting to the challenge before him. With newfound determination, Jonathan stood up straight and began analyzing the sphere. His training kicked in, and he realized that the sphere's defenses weren't random. They were patterns. He could predict them. The key to survival wasn't to fight the sphere, but to understand it. It was a puzzle, a deadly one, and he had to solve it if he wanted to survive. The seconds ticked by, and Jonathan's focus deepened. With every move, he became more aware of the intricate patterns surrounding the sphere. This was his moment to prove himself. The days that followed felt like an endless cycle of exhaustion, pain, and self-doubt for Jonathan. The alien Queen's training was unlike anything he had ever experienced. His body was pushed to its absolute limits, his mind tested in ways that left him questioning his very strength. Each day brought a new challenge, each more difficult than the last. There were no breaks, no moments of respite. The Queen had made it clear. This training was not meant to be easy. It was meant to prepare him for a future that could decide the fate of the entire galaxy. At first, Jonathan struggled. He was a soldier, not a superhuman. The first few days were filled with moments of doubt. His muscles ached from physical tasks that seemed impossible, his mind fogged by exhaustion. Every time he thought he had reached his limit, the Queen would push him further. Her presence was ever watchful, her eyes piercing through him as if she could see every flaw, every moment of hesitation. "You must break yourself to rebuild," she had said on the first day, her voice cold and commanding. "Only then will you understand your true potential." Jonathan had thought he knew what it meant to fight, to be a soldier. But this was different. Every move, every task, was designed not just to test his physical strength, but his mental and emotional endurance. He found himself questioning every step, every decision he made. The Queen never allowed him to rest on his laurels. If he failed, the punishment was swift. Another round, another task, another test. There was no room for mistakes. One day, Jonathan was placed in a chamber that appeared to be nothing more than a dark, empty void. The Queen stood at the entrance, watching him closely. "Survive," she ordered. Before Jonathan could ask what she meant, the floor beneath him began to shift. Suddenly, the room was filled with holographic enemies, humanoid figures with weapons that glowed with an eerie light. They moved quickly, their every action designed to overwhelm him. Jonathan's heart raced. He had been trained to fight enemies, but these were unlike anything he had faced. They seemed to anticipate his every move, adapting as quickly as he did. The longer he fought, the more outnumbered he became. His body was already tired from the previous tests, and now he had to rely not just on strength but on strategy. He darted between the holograms, avoiding their strikes and attacking when he saw an opening. But the more he fought, the more the room seemed to close in on him. There was no escape. The holographic enemies seemed endless, their attacks relentless. Jonathan could feel the weight of the training pressing down on him. His limbs felt heavy, his movements slower than before. But just as he thought he might collapse from exhaustion, he remembered the Queen's words. "Survive." With a burst of energy, Jonathan refocused. Instead of fighting every enemy head-on, he began to think strategically. He used the environment to his advantage, luring enemies into traps, using their own momentum against them. It wasn't about brute force anymore. It was about outsmarting them, using his surroundings to gain an edge. Slowly, the holographic enemies began to fall, and Jonathan gained the upper hand. By the time the last figure flickered and disappeared, Jonathan was on his knees, gasping for air. Sweat dripped from his brow, and his body felt like it had been pushed beyond its limits. But he had survived. It wasn't a victory in the traditional sense, but it was a victory nonetheless. As the door to the chamber opened, Jonathan stumbled out, barely able to keep his balance. The Queen was waiting for him, her expression unreadable. She studied him for a moment, then spoke. "You have passed the first trial. But this is just the beginning," she said, her tone not one of praise but of cold expectation. "You have learned how to survive. Now you will learn how to think." The following days were a blur of mental and physical challenges that tested every aspect of Jonathan's abilities. He was forced to learn alien languages, adapt to new combat techniques, and even study the strategies of previous wars fought across the galaxies. The Queen believed that every soldier, every warrior, needed not just strength but intellect. Jonathan had always relied on his instincts, but now he was learning the value of strategy, patience, and foresight. One of the most difficult challenges came when the Queen presented him with a simulated battlefield. It was a vast open landscape, and Jonathan was given only a few minutes to come up with a battle plan. His mission was simple: defend the position against a vastly superior force. The Queen provided him with a limited number of resources, and he had to decide how to use them to his advantage. At first, Jonathan relied on the basic tactics he had been taught in the army: set up defenses, hold the position, and wait for reinforcements. But as the simulation progressed, it became clear that this approach wouldn't work. The enemy forces were too advanced, their technology far superior. Jonathan's position was slowly being overrun. As the simulation came to a close, the Queen's voice echoed through the speakers. "You relied on old tactics that will not work in this galaxy. You must learn to adapt. The enemy you face will not fight as you expect. They will change the battlefield to suit their needs. You must learn to think ahead, to anticipate, to strike before they do." Jonathan sat in silence, reflecting on her words. For the first time, he began to understand the weight of the training. This was not just about learning how to fight. It was about learning how to think, how to adapt, and how to survive in an ever-changing world. The Queen's training was relentless, but it was shaping him into something more than just a soldier. He was becoming a warrior, not just of strength, but of mind. The training had not just broken him physically, it had reshaped him, reshaped his way of thinking. Every challenge, every failure, had been a lesson. And though he still had far to go, Jonathan could feel a change within himself. He was no longer just the guard who stood watch over a small post. He was becoming someone who could face whatever challenges lay ahead, someone who could stand with the greatest warriors in the galaxy. And though he was far from ready, Jonathan knew that he was one step closer to fulfilling the Queen's expectations, one step closer to surviving whatever the future would throw his way. Jonathan had been through days, no, weeks, of grueling training under the alien Queen's watchful eye. His body had endured physical trials beyond imagination, his mind tested with complex strategies and alien knowledge. But through it all, he had never truly felt ready. The Queen had pushed him harder with every passing day, and just when he thought he had reached his limit, she would push him further. It was as though she had a deep understanding of his potential, and she would not let him stop until that potential had been realized. But now, as the final test loomed ahead, Jonathan was uncertain. Could he truly pass this final trial? He had learned to survive, to think, to adapt, but there was always a lingering question. Would it be enough? The day of the final test arrived. Jonathan stood before the Queen in the same grand throne room where it all began, his armor shining from the countless hours of practice. He had learned the art of combat, but now the Queen had something more in mind, something far beyond what he had prepared for. The room was empty, save for the Queen herself. Her presence filled the space as always, but there was something different today. Her eyes were softer, yet still unwavering, as though she could read his every thought. "Are you ready for your final test?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. Jonathan nodded, though doubt lingered in the back of his mind. He had trained for everything, but this, whatever it was, felt different. The Queen had made it clear from the beginning that this test would not just be physical or mental. It was the culmination of everything he had learned. It was a test of his will, his courage, and his spirit. Without a word, the Queen stepped aside, revealing a small holographic display hovering in the air before her. Jonathan watched as the display flickered and projected a detailed map of a DIZ planet. The planet was unfamiliar to him, its surface covered in rocky terrain and vast deserts, but what caught his attention was the flashing red dot located at the heart of a dense, barren forest. It was marked with one word: objective. Jonathan's heart raced as the Queen's voice broke the silence. "You will journey to this planet, find the objective and return. But be warned, it is not as simple as it sounds. The path will be filled with obstacles, and the enemies you face will not be ordinary. You will face enemies of your own making, your deepest fears, your doubts, your weaknesses. Only by confronting them can you succeed." The words hit Jonathan like a hammer. Enemies of his own making? What did the Queen mean? He wasn't just fighting physical adversaries, he was fighting himself. The Queen continued, "You will not be alone. Your training has prepared you for this moment, but how you choose to face your fears will decide whether or not you succeed. Will you let them consume you, or will you rise above them? Only you can decide." Before Jonathan could respond, the Queen's hand raised, and a swirling vortex of light appeared in front of him. It was the gateway to the planet, the beginning of his final trial. With a deep breath, Jonathan stepped through the portal. The world around him shifted, and suddenly, he was standing on the harsh, rocky surface of the alien planet. The air was thin, the atmosphere unfamiliar, and the ground beneath his feet was unforgiving. The harsh winds cut through his armor, but he stood tall, ready to face whatever came his way. The map flickered in his mind, and Jonathan focused on the objective. He could do this. He had faced so many challenges before, and this would be no different. Or so he thought. As he moved deeper into the barren landscape, the first obstacle appeared, a massive, shadowy figure emerging from the darkness. Jonathan's heart skipped a beat. It was a manifestation of his own fear, an enormous, monstrous version of himself, twisted and distorted, towering over him. The creature roared, and Jonathan felt a cold chill run down his spine. His legs trembled, but he refused to back down. This was his fear, his weakness, and he would face it head-on. The battle was brutal. Jonathan's body moved on instinct, but his mind was clouded with doubt. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight for his very soul. Every strike the creature landed seemed to weaken his resolve, and every blow he landed seemed to do nothing. It was as if the creature was indestructible, representing all of his insecurities and failures. But then Jonathan remembered the Queen's words. Only by confronting your fears can you succeed. With a surge of determination, Jonathan stopped fighting the creature. Instead, he closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and acknowledged his fear. It was always there, lurking in the shadows of his mind, but now he could see it for what it was, just an illusion. The fear had no real power over him. It was a part of him, but it did not define him. Opening his eyes, Jonathan stood tall and faced the creature. This time, when he struck, the creature faltered. With each blow, the creature weakened until it finally dissipated into the air, leaving only a faint echo in its wake. Jonathan stood alone in the now empty landscape, his chest rising and falling as he caught his breath. He had done it. He had conquered his own fears. But the trial was not over. As Jonathan pressed forward toward the objective, more challenges arose. Each obstacle he faced was a reflection of his inner doubts. Self-doubt, fear of failure, fear of inadequacy. But with every battle he won, Jonathan grew stronger, more resolute. The training had prepared him for this, but it was his will to succeed that carried him through. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Jonathan reached the heart of the barren forest. There at the center was the objective, an ancient, glowing artifact embedded in the ground. As he approached it, he felt a sense of peace wash over him. This was the final step. He had faced his fears, overcome them, and now he had earned his place as a true warrior. Jonathan grasped the artifact, and as the energy surged through him, he felt a deep sense of triumph. The final test had been a victory, not just over the enemies before him, but over himself. He had proven that he was ready, not just for the Queen's mission, but for whatever challenges lay ahead. As the portal reappeared, Jonathan stepped through, returning to the Queen's throne room. She watched him in silence, her expression unreadable. "You have succeeded," she said, her voice calm yet filled with a hint of approval. "You are ready." Jonathan stood tall, his heart swelling with pride. He had passed the final test, and he was no longer just a guard. He was a warrior, strong, determined, and ready to face whatever challenges the universe had in store. The Queen smiled, and for the first time, Jonathan felt the full weight of her respect. This was only the beginning of a much greater journey, but he was ready to face it head-on,